going to record the audio of my presentation today. I do that every time I present because I think it's important for us as academics to share our work with non-academic audiences. So this will go on my blog and on social media and go out to lots of different communities, including the permaculture community that I'm going to talk about today. But I'm very conscious of the social obligation and social value that I can add from my role as an academic and not just talk to us fellow eggheads in conferences like this. And I say eggheads with all the love, as someone who's very much an academic egghead. Let's bring up the slide. Okay, so this picture here, this is from the International Permaculture Convergence in Hyderabad, India, from 2017. And this is all the participants in that gathering. And I've used this as my framing today for a few reasons. One of them is that this event, and permaculture conferences and convergences in general, are radically different from academic conferences. And that difference is a clue to why I ended up finding permaculture. So I'd known about permaculture since the 1990s, but never really delved into it until 2014 when I had a sabbatical semester and I had some space, so I did a permaculture design course at Ceres Environment Park in Melbourne, which is one of Australia's best demonstration sites for permaculture. And they invited me to teach into the course, and so I've been a permaculture teacher ever since at Ceres. And that appealed to me also because, you know, these permaculture events and the movement and permaculture people, there's a caring element within how people interacted with each other. And in the practice, that was very different to what I was experiencing as an academic in the academic world. And then around the same time, I'm also teaching a global environmental politics subject to second year undergrads. And they kept asking me, Ben, we know the world's screwed, but what can we do? I didn't really have a good answer until I did the permaculture design course. And I had something that was actionable at a person level where practice could be integrated into the bigger picture things that the environmental movement talks about. And then also I reflected back on the research I'd done on North Korea. So I'd cut my teeth looking at North Korea's nuclear weapons program, which is a very big divergence from what we're talking about here. But North Korea, they had a great famine during the 1990s in which their economy and agricultural system fell apart and ground to a halt. 600,000, maybe up to 2 million people died during that period. And my new permaculture knowledge led me to reflect on, you know, what could have they done better. And then I learned about the example of Cuba. Now, Cuba went through a very similar crisis for exactly the same reasons related to the collapse of the Soviet Union and the support that they were getting. But they still had a very difficult time during the mid-90s, but it wasn't as bad as the North Korean experience because they did have government programs for urban agriculture and organic agriculture, which the North Koreans didn't do. So all of these things coalesced in my interest in the permaculture movement, and that's what I'm going to talk about a bit further. So this presentation is a synthesis of a number of things. So it's not necessarily about any particular academic outputs. It does come from my teaching, both as a permaculture teacher at Ceres, but also as a teacher of environmental politics at La Trobe University, through which I've also taken students on study tours to South Korea and to China, where we've looked at permaculture sites and spoken with practitioners and other environmental activists. And also my research. So I've looked at permaculture from a social movement perspective, which is an ongoing project. I've looked at it from a community of practice perspective with my awesome colleague Simon Fade from the University of Manchester. And also looked at permaculture from an organisational governance perspective with other colleagues from the UK, Philip Grundeveld and Naomi van der Velden. So this presentation, yeah, it's about the permaculture movement, but it's also about me and the underlying theme of all this work And I've been thinking, and Sylvia and I had a chat about this over morning tea, is what's the appropriate mix for an academic of scholarship, of sustainability practice, and environmental activism? What's my broader social role as an academic at this specific moment in time, given the ecological crisis that we're all aware of? I'm working through this. I don't have any definitive answers, but I think it's an important question for all of us, and I'd love to discuss this further, through this event and beyond. So is everyone here familiar with what permaculture is? Yeah, that's good. I don't have to explain it in detail. But I will give a brief outline, because it's a number of things. First of all, it's a holistic design system. And it was developed to consciously recreate the diversity and multifunctionality of ecosystems in agricultural and human systems, so that these systems would have increased resilience and you'd reduce the energy and chemical and labour inputs of those systems. These guys on the slide here, Bill Mollison at the top and David Holmgren at the bottom, were the two originators of the permaculture movement in Australia. It was developed in Tasmania. This is one of Australia's great intellectual exports, if you look at it. Bill Mollison, his contribution was what we see in the orange circle there. These were his design principles, and these were very ontologically focused on what's the appropriate role for us within agricultural systems. David Holmgren, his design principles are the blue ones on the outer edge, and he was the junior partner with Bill, and he gave these principles a more practical application that permaculture designers could actually latch onto and use. The appeal of this design system is that it's locally specific. You can apply these design principles in any context, and what you come up with is not a top-down cookie-cutter solution, but it depends on the resources and needs that are available in the given location at the specific site. And this is greatly appealing to a lot of people, in contrast to the kind of top-down paternalistic governmentality approaches that often are cited as environmental solutions. And this has enabled the rapid spread of the permaculture movement from Australia, because it can become regionally focused. Permaculture is also a system of ethics. And this is the big clue as to why I find permaculture convergences more fun than academic conferences. Because this system of ethics kind of shapes how people relate with one another and their approaches to the world in general. So the three ethics: people care, earth care, and fair share. And ideally, any permaculture design system or site that's designed on these principles will embody all three of these things. But right now, this is an academic audience, and we can see the inherent difficulties of trying to operationalise these ethics in the real world. And that's part of the challenge of permaculture design, and the clear political implications that this represents. If we think of the permaculture movement now, and this collectivity is a community of practice, it's a global community of practice. So in my work with Sim and Fadi, we interviewed and surveyed people from 5 different continents around the world, either in direct interviews or via survey form, to investigate how this community of practice actually operates. So the community of practice idea, this is based on the work of Etienne Wenger and other people who looked at this in terms of how organisations run and how informal groupings of people develop outside of or within or in complement with structured organisations in order to get things done. And any community of practice, according to this theory, has these 3 elements: the shared body of knowledge, the shared communal engagements, and a set of shared practices. So permaculture, the movement, has all of these things. As a body of knowledge, it's got the ethics and design principles that I talked about. It's got locally specific interventions and strategies. This is the body of knowledge that practitioners in given locations develop for their place in the world. And not all of these are unique to permaculture, but the design system allows the incorporation of other bodies of knowledge as well. The shared communal engagements, you have events like these convergences, such as this. This is from the International Convergence in India, and a group of people who are involved in the academic space. And this grouping, which I was a part of, we were trying to strategize and think about answering that exact question I posed at the start today. What's our role as academics within the movement and within broader environmentalism and sustainability transitions? And there's online communities and media publications and so forth that are part of this set of shared communal engagements. The shared practices, well, that's the actual application. So permaculture design is, or the permaculture movement is very much structured around the permaculture design course, which is a body of anywhere from 72 to 100 hours of teaching units on the permaculture design system. And that has this horizontal diffusion model. So let's say I'm Bill Mollison, and I have a group of students here, which are represented by you. You complete the permaculture design course, and then each one of you could go out and then teach that course to other people, wherever you happen to be located. And that's how the movement spread over time, through this horizontal diffusion model, which has been remarkably effective. You think it's gone from 2 blokes in Tasmania to a global movement in 40 years. That's an extraordinary achievement for a horizontal diffusion model. These shared practices include demonstration sites, places like Ceres Environment Park in Melbourne, or the Food Forest up in Gawler, here in Adelaide, but countries around the world. There's plenty of these demonstration sites, along with practitioners who are consultants or running businesses, who are putting this into practice in their daily lives. I've also been pondering whether permaculture, we can consider this movement as a social movement, as something more than just a community of practice. And this is where the political dimensions of the movement come into play. The political dimensions of permaculture are very much a response to entrenched systems of political power. So I took a look at some of the key social movement theories, and this is a project that's very much in motion at the moment, so this is incomplete. But if we look at permaculture from the perspective of relative deprivation theory, for example, and look at the shared mobilising grievances that shape this movement, you've got energy descent and environmental degradation. But you've also got angst over some of the more dehumanising aspects of hierarchical social organisation. And I know in the permaculture design course at Ceres, one of the common elements that unifies the very diverse group of students that come in and do this is that they're really jack of the organisations that they're involved in the workplace, the bureaucracies that they have to interact with as clients and stakeholders, and they want something different. They want a different way of living and relating to each other. They don't know exactly what that's going to be, but that's what leads them to this place. If we look at the political opportunity theory perspective and the contextual conditions that have shaped this movement, it really sprung out from the 1970s and the oil shocks, and that's the context in which David Holmgren and Bill Mollison developed this body of work originally. But you see, fast forward to today, obviously climate change and the global climate movement are providing a facilitating context for people to find this movement. As well as the global financial crisis, people looking for different economic models and different models of governing and relating to each other. From a mass society theory perspective, permaculture offers a utopian vision for how the world could be better. And that's really embodied in the 3 permaculture ethics. It's embodied in the very hard sustainability focus of permaculture, so not the 3-legged stool greenwash garbage that is very easy to critique from the sustainable development body of work. But really, how do we establish systems that stop us from undercutting the preconditions for our own survivability and existence? And that's what, it's a real goal for permaculture. And through that, establishing relations of localised production, consumption and exchange that are different and that are contracted in scale to something more local and more human-centred, which is not without its issues, and I'll get to that shortly. From the perspective of new social movement theories, participation and identity within the movement, this is really interesting. So it's very oppositional to mainstream politics, economy and culture, as is clear. And this commonality, this oppositional perspective is something that you see. It's the common thread that links permaculture people together. And you go to an international convergence and you've got these things that link you together. So one is the commitment to the ethics, and the other is this dissatisfaction with the status quo, and you want something different. You want to bring this utopian future into view. And that's very energising. That's what brings people into the movement, and that's what keeps them there, not just as political tourists. From a resource mobilisation theory perspective and the movement dynamics, this horizontal diffusion model that I talked about before, this is how the permaculture movement spread, but it's also illustrative of how the movement tends to organise itself. It's very decentralised. It doesn't have a peak body or a central node. And in a lot of ways, it's very anarchic as well. So, again, when you can see where people are coming from to find this movement, that's what they want. That also presents problems for how permaculture practitioners can work together and have political impact at broader scale. Because no hierarchy, because people are reacting to hierarchy, they don't want hierarchy, but no kind of organisation is equally problematic. So the movement is in the process of developing horizontal organisational models and ways of being able to work together that are really quite exciting, but they're still a work in progress. Now this kind of movement's so permaculture and sustainability transitions, we know the sustainability transition process, everything about our society needs to change and evolve in order to get there. Part of the appeal of permaculture, because it's got this holistic design methodology, it can do all of these things simultaneously. If you've got a good design system, that's what it's intended to do. Rather than focusing on technology or economy specifically, you've got this holistic design. The problems of scaling up. If we get to the critiques. Now, I'm not a doe-eyed fanboy of the permaculture movement by any means. As a scholar, I bring in the critical rigour that as a practitioner helps the bodies that I'm involved in keep ourselves honest and get better and make the improvements that we need. So the problem of scaling up related to this horizontal and anarchic organisational structure that the movement has. How can you have political impact as a movement when how you relate to each other is so fragmented? That's an issue, and that's something this Permaculture Collab project, which is illustrated here, I've been involved in that. And that's an issue that we've been trying to address, is how do you scale up the adoption and implementation of permaculture and its political voice without compromising and without recreating the kind of hierarchies that people were trying to escape in coming to permaculture in the process. But also from an economic perspective, if you're asking farmers to transition to a permaculture production model or to organic agriculture from the big ag model, the debt trap that people find themselves in, that's a real issue that prevents people from moving towards a permaculture model. Another critique, permaculture doesn't challenge global systems of power in the way that perhaps we think it does. And that there's, we have to rethink, is dropping out and establishing a separate community, is that the way to go, or do we want to implement this stuff where we are? And I strongly argue for that. Like every other collective on the planet, it does have a diversity and inclusivity problem that permaculture practitioners have to work through. And there's good work in the social permaculture space, which I'm involved in, around decolonisation and social justice. So finally I'm going to wind up here. So I want to leave you with the idea that at this time of ecological crisis, that we should all as academics be scholars, practitioners and activists in some way that's appropriate. I'm not going to tell you exactly what to do, but I think some kind of mix is something that we should all aspire to if we're interested in environmental politics. So this has been a very quick and nasty overview of the kind of work that I've been doing. Very happy to talk about it further through the conference and beyond. So thank you for your time today.